For 13 years, Bashar al-Assad's regime in Syria looked, well, unbreakable. It weathered a brutal civil war that completely redrew the map of the Middle East, and then, poof, in just 10 days, it vanished. Today, we're going to unpack the incredible, almost unbelievable story of how one of the world's most entrenched regimes completely unraveled.
Just imagine hearing this. These were the final, frantic orders bouncing around the presidential palace in Damascus. On a chaotic night in December 2024, a ruler who had held Syria in an iron grip for over 2 decades was suddenly on the run. The entire system was in an absolute freefall.
So how on earth does that even happen, right? You survived 13 years of intense civil war, only to completely collapse in less than 2 weeks? It sounds impossible. To really get our heads around this surreal ending, we've got to rewind the clock just a little bit to the surprise move that lit the fuse.
It all started with what you could only call a lightning offensive. But listen, this wasn't some slow, grinding battle. This was a cascade, a full-on domino effect so fast it left pretty much the entire world completely stunned.
I mean, just look at this timeline. The speed is absolutely staggering. The offensive kicks off on November 27th. Just 3 days later, Aleppo, the country's economic heart, is gone. 5 days after that, Hama falls. Then Homs, the so-called capital of the revolution, is captured just 2 days later. And by December 8th, it's all over. The rebels are in Damascus. This wasn't just a battle. It was a complete, system-wide implosion.
But here's the thing. That incredible speed wasn't just about overwhelming force. Not at all. In key cities like Hama, the victory wasn't actually won with bullets. It was won with a broadcast. A really brilliant piece of psychological warfare that moved way faster than any army ever could.
And the genius of this move was just how simple it was. Rebels literally drove up to a road sign 20 kilometers outside of Hama, filmed a quick video saying, hey, we're on the outskirts, and then they just released it online. That's it. The video went viral, creating this illusion that a massive siege was about to happen. Panic did the rest. Regime soldiers, totally convinced they were about to be trapped, just abandoned their heavily fortified posts and fled. Hama fell, not to a battle, but to a bluff.
And you know, while all this is happening, the official state media is telling a very different story. The Minister of Defense gets on TV claiming it's all just a strategic withdrawal, a calculated plan. Right, but on the ground, it was a total rout. We saw pictures of abandoned tanks, empty military bases, and reports were coming in that governors were literally escaping on military planes. The gap between the official story and reality wasn't just a gap, it was a chasm.
But the collapse wasn't just happening on the battlefield. There was a much quieter, but maybe even more devastating collapse happening behind the scenes as Assad's most critical allies started to, well, back away. So at the most critical moment, as his entire country is falling apart around him, Assad reaches for his lifeline, Vladimir Putin. He makes these frantic calls to his most powerful ally. But the line was silent. Moscow just wasn't picking up the phone. His political isolation was now absolute. You see, Russia's whole stance had shifted. They weren't providing military support to help him win anymore. Instead, their military attaché in Damascus was basically now an exit planner. With zero help on the way and rebels closing in fast, the choice became brutally clear. Fleeing wasn't just an option, it was the only one left on the table.
Which brings us right back to that final, totally surreal night in the presidential palace, and the meticulously planned secret departure of a president.
And this is where things get really weird. As the entire regime is collapsing outside, inside the palace walls, there's this bizarre sense of normalcy. The kitchen staff, they were preparing the president's evening meal, just like any other night, completely unaware that history was being made right under their noses. And up in his office, Assad just sat there, in silence. The phone wasn't ringing anymore. There were no final orders left to give. The great machine of the state had finally seized up, leaving the man at its very center with absolutely nothing left to command. The escape itself was cloaked in secrecy. There was no big presidential motorcade, no fanfare, nothing. Just 2 ordinary unmarked cars slipping through a back gate. It was a quiet, almost undignified exit for a man who had commanded such absolute power for so long.
As he left his office for the very last time, one account describes him walking the corridors completely alone without his usual crew of guards and aides. He didn't take anything with him. It was as if he was already a ghost in his own palace.
And the escape itself, well, that was a carefully orchestrated Russian operation. Stage 1, a discreet flight from Damascus to Russia's Hamimim airbase, still inside Syria.
There, they waited for hours under the cover of darkness before boarding a second plane for the final jump, the journey into exile in Moscow.
And just like that, it was over. There was no final speech to the nation, no defiant last stand in the rubble. The Assad era didn't end with a bang, but with a quiet, anonymous flight into the night.
So, with the president gone, an entire system of power just dissolved, almost overnight, and it left behind a massive vacuum and a country just holding its breath. Then, at 6:26 in the morning, the confirmation came. A journalist on the ground sent out the message that just rippled across the entire globe. Syria was without a president. Bashar al-Assad was gone.
And on the ground, the signs of the old regime were just vanishing. Government ministries were found totally empty. Soldiers' uniforms were literally discarded in the streets. Security checkpoints were abandoned. And as the news spread, celebrations just erupted in cities that had only known war for a decade. In a telling sign of this new reality, a Christian bishop in Aleppo even got personal reassurances from incoming rebel leaders that his community would be safe. This quote from just an ordinary citizen, it really captures the sheer disbelief and the emotion of that moment. For millions of people, a future that they never ever thought they would live to see had suddenly arrived. It was just a profound, world-altering moment. And so, after a stunning 10-day collapse, a 50-year dynasty came to a sudden end. But, the fall of one power is never the end of the story. It's the beginning of a new and deeply uncertain one. And that leaves us with the ultimate question for Syria and for the world. A ruler has fallen, but what rises in his place?